Often overlooked in the shadow of nearby Auschwitz, Bedzin is a small town in eastern Upper Silesia. Before the Nazi invasion of Poland in September 1939, the town was home to around 25,000 Jews, comprising roughly half the population. A flourishing industrial town, Bedzin was also a centre of culture, education and religion. Under Nazi occupation, all this was to change.
Właściwie to była masakra. To była masakra. No ale to był zaraz, to było jeszcze w 1939 roku.
Września,
zaraz na początku pierwsze 2 czy 3 tygodnie jak weszli. W centrum jak nas tutaj wypędzili, to tam była buźnica żydowska.
Aha.
I oni podpalili tą buźnicę.
Po paru dniach, dosłownie po paru dniach, to myśmy do tych szkieletów domów niektórych zaglądali, to tam był żar. W piwnicach był żar po węglu, po tym wszystkim to był żar. Gorąco było niesamowicie. Niektórzy ludzie, jak się ich budynki podpalali od spodu, od dołu, od parter, to z pięter starali się tam otwierać okna, wyskakiwać. Niemcy strzelali właśnie do nich.
No jak dzieci, pobiegliśmy tam. No więc to trudno opisać. To trudno opisać, bo wszyscy tych Żydów wprowadzili tam, gdzie kogo przyłapali na drodze, wprowadzili ich tam do tej buźnicy. I tam zamkli i palili. I podpalili. I podpalili tam tą buźnicę, no więc tam były okropne rzeczy, krzyki no wiadomo, bo co się tam działo. No trochę się tam wyrwało ludzi.
Some people managed to escape.
Tak, uciekali, no to strzelali.
So they were shot, those who
to
were
strzelali do tych ludzi tam. I potem jak się już skończyło, to potem na drugi dzień.
On the second day.
To trupów leżało masę, nie można było mało.
Setki.
Masę leżało trupów. Nie można było przejść. Trudno było nawet przejść gdziekolwiek.
Na rowerze pojechałem na cmentarz żydowski, który do dzisiejszego dnia istnieje, jak jedziemy do Czeladzi, po lewej stronie, nie? Ten cmentarz żydowski.
Dzisiaj.
To tam w tym budynku na podłodze to byli układani. Właśnie ja tu opisuję starzy, młodzi, mężczyźni, kobiety. To takie wrażenie na mnie, bo ja miałem 14 lat wtedy, wiesz, usta pootwierane, w oczach papa poprzyklejane, takie coś, żółci byli. Ci ludzie byli żółci od tego dymu czy od czegoś. I ja tak się napatrzyłem na tych ludzi, że jakoś zaczęło się ściemniać. To ja tym rowerem z tej górki, to przyznaję się wam, jechałem tak, jakby mi włosy dęba stanęły ze strachu, jakby mnie coś goniło. No.
Early acts of violence, such as the burning of Jews in the synagogue and surrounding houses, soon gave way to a more enduring period of what might be called systemic violence. Eastern Upper Silesia was annexed and incorporated into the expanded Greater German Reich. The county and town of Bedzin were taken under civilian administration.
My father was the son of a Landrat. Landrat is the head of a district administration and wanted to be a Landrat also. This was his professional dream. Many Germans perhaps thought, well, there was the SS and on the other hand the normal administration, and they were quite apart. But this was not possible because the superior of all the Regierungspräsidenten and of the Landräte and so on was a man who resided in the Ministry of the Interior, and his name was Reinhard Heydrich. And he sent many of these circulars around, what should happen to the Jews, how their rations should be cut, how they should be concentrated in ghettos and so on and so forth. And the administration, of course, couldn't help executing that.
Under German civilian administration, Jews were forced out of their houses and moved into a ghetto area. They were subjected to forced labour duties, and some were deported to slave labour camps. Living on reduced rations, wearing the Star of David, Jews endured a regime of terror. Conventionally, we think of Nazi perpetrators as those involved in direct physical violence: the SS, the Gestapo, the killing squads, and the concentration camp personnel. Less well explored, however, are the roles of civilian administrators. But they implemented a deeply racist system, laying the groundwork in terms of ghettoization, stigmatization, loss of liberty, humiliation, and degradation, which later made it easier for the frontline killers to do their work, rounding up and deporting the Jews. It was often only at this stage, and sometimes even later or not at all, that civilian functionaries realised where their actions had led.
Of course, we asked him what happened there when after all we were born, and he told us about it, but not so many details. It struck us, my sister and myself, that my father felt quite uncomfortable in this place. He didn't like the memories. Of course, we didn't know much about those memories at that time. But we both remembered that he felt uncomfortable and that he felt like leaving as soon as possible.
Nie tak daleko tam na takiej ulicy Zawale powiesili kilku Żydów. No to akurat przypadek chciał, bo tutaj w środku Bedzina mieszkała babcia. I akurat wracałam z powrotem, jak musiałam to widzieć.
Coming back from my grandmom and I came across this execution.
To znaczy, byliśmy na różnych egzekucjach zmuszani. Szło się do pracy, a oni w tym czasie na kimś wykonują egzekucję, zatrzymywali tych ludzi, coraz więcej nas się zbierało i dopiero robili specjalnie. Tak wykonywali te egzekucje. Tutaj 2 jest powieszonych Żydów na Zawale, właśnie na najstarszym Kierkowie. To był najstarszy.
A widział pan
cmentarz.
akurat tą egzekucję?
Tak, na drzewie wieszani.
So what was it he actually witnessed in Bedzin that made him feel he must leave?
Well, it was on the one hand the general conditions, life conditions of Poles and especially Jews, and then the deportation. He saw the first large-scale deportation of Jews in August 1942.
I saw how a soldier tore a baby who was only a few months old out of a mother's hands and bashed his head against an electric pylon. The baby's brains splashed on the wood. The mother went crazy. I am writing this as if nothing has happened. But I'm young, I'm 14, and I haven't seen much in my life, and I'm already so indifferent. Now I am terrified when I see uniforms. I'm turning into an animal waiting to die. One can lose one's mind thinking about this. Rutger Laskia, diary entry, written in February 1943 in the ghetto, recollecting her experiences of the previous summer. One of 23,000 Jews gathered on a former sports ground, now the Bedzin bus terminus, Rutger Laskia faced the selections of August 1942. Over the course of several days, 4,700 Bedzin Jews were selected for death and sent down the railway tracks to the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Thousands of others were selected for slave labour, either in the locality or in camps run by the SS. Those waiting for the trains were held here in a former Jewish orphanage, conveniently situated right next to the railway tracks. They were loaded onto trucks and cattle wagons here at the Bedzin railway station. One of the few Bedzin survivors, Doris Martin, recalls, "For the next several days, Bedzin was a city of tears. Mostly people just stayed in their homes, mourning and praying." If God existed, he would have certainly not permitted that human beings be thrown alive into furnaces and the heads of little toddlers be smashed with the butt of guns or be shoved into sacks and gassed to death. I am sick and tired of these grey houses, of the steady fear seen in everybody's faces. This fear clutches onto everyone and doesn't let go. Rutger Laskier did not survive the final clearance of the ghetto in the summer of 1943. She died in Auschwitz just a few months after writing these words. We traditionally think of Nazi perpetrators as the front-line killers, those who pulled the trigger. But civilian functionaries also played a role in creating the preconditions for genocide. The ways in which they represented their actions to themselves and to others, at the time and later, are highly complex.
Did he show you where he worked, where he lived?
Yes, he showed us the house where we lived, the official house that he inhabited, which was the house of a former Jewish factory owner who had fled.
This wealthy factory owner, the Schein family, had also endowed the Jewish orphanage, taken over by the Nazis as a gulag or transit camp.
He also showed us where his former office was. Yes. There wasn't much to see there. It was a very drab place, and I think still is. The whole area there, this eastern part of Upper Silesia, including my own birthplace, Gleiwitz, I mean, this is not exactly what you would choose for your holidays.
Klauser was clearly uncomfortable about his role, suffering from nerves throughout 1942. He finally left for the front in December 1942, feeling that in this way he could avoid, as he put it, innocently becoming guilty. But it was already too late. The municipal authorities had become deeply implicated, effectively incarcerating the Jews in the ghetto and making it easier for the SS and Gestapo to carry out the final ghetto clearance, even in face of fierce resistance on the part of the Jews, in an uprising lasting 2 weeks in the summer of 1943.
In his view, and in the view of many Germans, there was the opportunity of the grey immigration, and that was the army, the Wehrmacht, which for a long time was comparatively independent, and later on it was, of course, no longer independent, but still people thought there they could do what every normal Briton or American did, serve their country in the army. My father, of course, realized much later that only as long as the army stood could the furnaces of Auschwitz operate, so that this was certainly an error. But this was what he and many other conservatives thought at that time.
Auschwitz has come to epitomise the evil of genocide. More people were killed here than in any other single site of extermination. Yet this was only a tiny fraction of the total. Far more people were murdered across Europe, in fields and villages, in towns and cities, than in all the dedicated centres of extermination. And people also died from the effects of brutality, malnutrition and disease in the overcrowded ghettos and labour camps run by the Nazis.
My father would tell me about some terrible experiences that he had in a variety of camps during the Second World War. But sometimes only in the middle of the night when he would have a nightmare and I would hear it, did I realize that probably the most horrific part of what he had experienced is something that he didn't share with me. Growing up the way in the atmosphere that I did, of course, the Holocaust was omnipresent. I was not one of those children who did not hear about it from their parents. Quite to the contrary, my parents talked, my father especially, but my mother as well, talked about it all the time.
Oh yes, they talked a lot. I mean, many people of my generation say that their parents never talked about the Third Reich. My parents did so a great deal, especially my father always tried to understand how was it possible that everything went so wrong and what could he have done differently.
Even in families where there was a great deal of candor about those experiences, there were certain things that, for very understandable emotional reasons, parents didn't share with their children, or at least not directly.
He even succeeded in saving for the time being his own janitor, who was Jewish, and his family. He put on his army uniform, went to the place where all these people were interned and said, I need these people for my work, and they released them. But after 1 week, these Jews were hidden in his basement. They had to leave, and he doesn't know what happened to them. Probably they were also caught by the SS later on. He had an impression what Auschwitz was really about only in 1944 when he met a schoolmate, a former schoolmate in a train, and he was wearing an SS uniform. He asked him, now where are you working? And he said, in Auschwitz. And he said, what are you doing there? He said, oh, don't ask me, it's horrible. And then he had a foreboding what happened there. Of course, many other Germans knew much more, not necessarily about Auschwitz, because these death camps were really kept secret very well.
They talk a lot.
Wszystko najgorsze, wszystko zło.
Yeah, everything what is the worst, yes, the worst. They were discussing, they were saying things. So, więc ludzie wiedzieli, co się dzieje. Wszyscy wiedzieli.
Tak, to nie było tajemnicą.
Okay, so everybody knew about Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Tak. Całe społeczeństwo.
Tak.
Więc jak ktoś mówi, że on nie wie, to po prostu bzdury gada. Że on
nie, wszyscy wiedzieli.
Everybody knew.
Wszyscy wiedzieli, to wcale nie było, nawet oni chyba się nie kryli. Bo to nawet nie zabraniali mówić ani nic.
Tak?
Nie zabraniali wcale mówić.
Were people very scared?
Czy ludzie bardzo się bali?
Oj tak.
Tam na rogu, gdzie ta żółta tablica, ją widać, to przed wojną mieszkał Żyd, miał sklep Wieloński się nazywa. Tak, to my już, ojciec powiedział, już się nie musisz przejmować żałmelem ani kacami, bo już z nimi nie będziemy rozmawiać. Ja mówię, a dlaczego tato? Synek, oni już dawno w Oświęcimiu kominem wylecieli.
There is, of course, a clear difference between the perpetrators from the Gestapo, the SS and the police forces, the men who shot and killed, and the grey-suited civilian administrators in their offices. But this does not mean that these civilian functionaries should be overlooked. Whatever their inner qualms and doubts, they faithfully implemented Nazi policies. Everyday racism meant that they were able to ignore the suffering and anguish of the Jews they had forced into ghettos, maltreated and starved. And in systematically degrading and constraining the Jews, in destroying their physical and psychological capacity for resistance or escape, Hitler's facilitators also, whether willingly or unwillingly, ultimately helped pave the way for genocide. After the war, with the focus on so much physical brutality and murder, these civil servants were frequently able to integrate seamlessly into new post-war regimes, telling stories about their past, which rendered it harmless, even respectable. Some general conclusions can be drawn about the wider significance of the case of Bedzin. It can help to explain how the Holocaust was made possible by the actions of so many, yet actually intended by so few, and how some people could later claim that they had always been against it, with varying degrees of honesty, while their behaviour at the time had in fact propelled the dynamism of Nazism onto the murderous conclusion that was Auschwitz and all that this stands for.